Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the second season of this podcast, The Adoption Door. I'm your host, Andres, and if you're new to the show, welcome. And if you're a longtime listener, welcome back. Here I read people's stories about adoption that they send in to me. If you'd like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to theadoptiondoor@gmail.com. You can also message me on Facebook, and you can find me under the same name, The Adoption Door. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into our first story. This one comes from Jerry in Flint, Michigan, and he writes, As an adoptee, the journey through the adoption process was a roller coaster of emotions and experiences. From the moment I became aware of my adoption, a mix of curiosity, excitement, and apprehension consumed me. Here's a glimpse into my first-hand account of going through the adoption process. My story begins with a deep longing to understand my roots. As I grew older, questions about my biological family and circumstances surrounding my adoption intensified. These inquiries fueled by my desire to embark on the search for my identity. The first step involved contacting the adoption agency that facilitated my adoption. I had to provide them with my personal information, such as my birth name, birth date, and any details I knew about my biological parents. It was a bittersweet moment, as I was torn between the excitement of potentially discovering my origins and the fear of uncovering painful truths. After submitting my request, a period of waiting ensued. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. It felt like an eternity as I anxiously anticipated any news from the agency. Every email or phone call became a source of hope, tinged with fear of disappointment. Finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. The adoption agency informed me that they had located my birth parents and initiated contact with them. Emotions overwhelmed me as I processed this significant development. I was on the verge of uncovering a part of my life that had remained a mystery for so long. The agency facilitated the exchange of letters between my birth parents and me, allowing us to share stories, feelings, and questions. Each letter was like a treasure containing fragments of my past that were gradually piecing together. It was a delicate dance of building trust, understanding, and empathy through the written word. As the correspondence deepened, the agency deemed it appropriate for us to meet in person. The meeting day approached with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Would they accept me? Would I feel a connection? Countless thoughts raced through my mind, but I knew I had to take this step. The meeting was filled with raw emotions. Tears were shed, hugs exchanged, and stories shared. It was a moment of profound vulnerability and acceptance. In that instant, the concept of family expanded beyond blood ties. I realized that love and connection can transcend biology. In the years that followed, my relationship with my birth family evolved. We forged a bond based on mutual understanding, respect, and love. We celebrated milestones, shared joys, and supported each other through difficult times. The adoption process had brought us together, weaving a new tapestry of interconnected lives. Reflecting on my journey as an adoptee, I've come to appreciate the intricacies of the adoption process. It's a path that intertwines hope, longing, and discovery. While it can be emotionally challenging, it also has the power to bring immense joy and fulfillment. Through adoption, I've not only found my roots, but also gained a newfound appreciation for the complexity and beauty of family. Okay, thank you, Jerry, for your submission. Now we're going to switch gears here, and I received some stories that got me really thinking. It talks about when a parent should tell a child that he or she is adopted, that the child is adopted. That's what this next story mentions. It comes from Allison in Folsom, California, and she writes, I remember the day I decided it was time to tell my adopted child about their adoption. It was a moment I had thought about for years, a delicate balance between wanting to be honest and wanting to protect their feelings. My journey as an adoptee had given me a unique perspective on adoption. I was adopted at a very young age, and my parents had always been open and honest with me about it. They never hid the fact that I was adopted, and they made sure I knew how much they loved me, and that being adopted didn't change anything. When my husband Steve and I decided to adopt a child, we knew from the beginning that we wanted to follow the same path of openness and honesty that my parents had taken with me. We believed that it was essential for our child's emotional well-being to know their story from the very beginning. Our son, who we named Ethan, came into our lives when he was just a few days old. From the moment we held him in our arms, we felt an indescribable love and connection. We were his parents, and he was our son, no matter the biology. As Ethan grew, we would often talk about his adoption in simple terms. We had books about adoption, and we would read them together. We wanted him to grow up with understanding that adoption was a beautiful way to create a family. We celebrated adoption as a special occasion every year, marking the day he officially became a part of our family. However, as Ethan got older, he began to ask more questions about his birth parents. He was curious about where he came from, why his skin was a different color, and why he didn't look like us. These questions were natural, and we welcomed them with open hearts. One evening, when Ethan was about 7 years old, we sat down with him for a heartfelt conversation. We explained to him that he was adopted, that his birth parents loved him very much, but they couldn't take care of him at the time of their lives. We assured him that his adoption was a choice made out of love, both by his parents and by us. Ethan listened carefully, his eyes filled with curiosity and understanding. He asked a few more questions, and we answered them honestly, as best we could. We emphasized that he was our son, no matter where he came from, and that our love for him was boundless. The conversations went better than we could have ever hoped. Ethan seemed to absorb the information. It didn't change his perception of us as parents. In fact, he seemed to appreciate the honesty and openness. He asked to hear the story of his adoption more than once, and we would lovingly recount the details for him. As the years passed, our relationship with Ethan continued to thrive. He grew up knowing that adoption was part of his story, but it didn't define him. He was a smart, kind, and confident young man, and we were incredibly proud of him. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned from my own adoption experience. It taught me that honesty and love are the cornerstones of a healthy adoptive family. Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to when to tell a child about their adoption. For us, it was a journey of openness from the very beginning, and I can confidently say that it was one of the best decisions we ever made. Well, Allison, you make a very good point about being honest when it comes to telling your child about their adoption. Thank you for that story. Our next story comes from Rosemary. Hi, I'm Rosemary. I live in the UK, and I remember the day vividly when I decided to tell my child Christopher about his adoption. It was a sunny afternoon, and we were sitting on the porch swing, gently swaying back and forth. Christopher, who had just turned 7, was curiously examining a ladybug that had landed on his finger. I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment I had been preparing for. I began by gently asking Christopher if he knew what adoption was. He looked at me with those innocent eyes, filled with curiosity. I explained that adoption was a special way that our family came together. I told him that when he was a tiny baby, another family who couldn't take care of him like we could, and made the loving choice for him to come and live with us forever. As I spoke, I could see the wheels turning in his little head. He seemed to be processing this information, trying to understand what it meant for him. I could feel my own heart pounding, hoping that I was choosing the right words and that right moment to share the significant part of his story. I continued by assuring him that he was loved from the very beginning, even before he came to live with us. I told him about the day we first met, and how our hearts instantly connected, and we knew he was meant to be a part of our family. I emphasized that adoption didn't change anything about how much we loved him, and it didn't make him any less our child. It was just a different way of becoming a family. Tears welled up in my eyes as I shared this emotional journey with my child. I told him about the paperwork, the meetings, and the anticipation leading up to the day he officially became our son. I described the joy and happiness that filled our hearts when the judge declared him legally ours forever. Christopher listened attentively, absorbing every word, and then asked, "Do you have 2 families, Mom?" It was a question that I had been prepared for. I nodded and explained that he indeed had a birth family who loved him very much, but couldn't take care of him the way we could. I assured him it was okay to have two families who cared for him, and that made him extra special. As the conversation continued, my child's question flowed like a river. He wanted to know more about his birth family, where they were, and why they couldn't raise him. I answered honestly and delicately, making sure that he understood that it was a decision made out of love. By the time our conversation ended, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to twinkle in the darkened sky. Christopher nestled closer to me on the porch swing, and I could see a sense of understanding and acceptance in his eyes. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm glad you're my family, Mom." Telling my child about his adoption was a deeply emotional and important moment in our journey together. It was a conversation filled with love, honesty, and reassurance, and it strengthened the bond between us. As we sat there, embraced by the warm evening, I knew that we had navigated this delicate topic with grace and love, and that our family was stronger for it. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for taking the time to share your story. And our next story comes from Jessica, and she writes, "My name is Jessica, and I remember the day I decided to tell my daughter Ella that she was adopted. It was a decision that I had been putting off for a while, hoping to find the perfect moment, the right words to ease her into this life-changing revelation. Ella was 10 years old at the time, and I wanted to be honest with her, but I also wanted to ensure she felt loved and secure throughout the process. One sunny afternoon, I took Ella to her favorite ice cream parlor, hoping the sweet treats would soften the blow of what I was about to tell her. As we sat in a small round table by the window, the warm sunlight casting a gentle glow on her freckled cheeks, I cleared my throat nervously. "Ella," I began, "there's something important we need to talk about." She looked up from her ice cream cone, her big blue eyes filled with curiosity. "You know how families can be different, right? Some families have a mommy and a daddy, and some just have one parent, and some are made in special ways." She nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, I guess so." "Well," I continued, "our family's a little different, too. You see, when you were a baby, you were adopted." I paused, trying to gauge her reaction. Her eyes widened, and her ice cream began to melt, unnoticed, in her hand. "Adopted?" She whispered the word as if it was a secret she had never heard before. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, sweetheart, Mommy and Daddy adopted you because we wanted you to be a part of our family more than anything in the world. We love you just as much as if you were born to us, and nothing will ever change that." For a moment, there was silence. Then tears welled up in Ella's eyes, and she pushed her half-eaten ice cream aside. "Why didn't you tell me before? Why did you keep it a secret?" I felt my heart break as I saw hurt in her eyes. I had hoped for a different reaction, one where she would understand that being adopted meant she was chosen and loved deeply. Instead, she felt betrayed by the omission of this truth. "I'm so sorry, Ella," I said, in my voice crackling with emotion. "We didn't want to keep it a secret, but we didn't know when the right time to tell you was. We were scared that you might be upset, and we wanted to protect you." Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "But secrets hurt, Mom. You should have told me sooner." Her words pierced my heart, and I realized the gravity of the mistake I had made. I reached across the table and took her trembling hand in mine. "You're right, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner, and I'm truly sorry for not doing so. We love you more than anything in the world, and we want to be honest with you from now on." As the afternoon sun began to set, we talked more about her adoption. I answered her questions as honestly as I could, reassuring her of our love and commitment. Over time, Ella began to understand that being adopted didn't make her any less of the part of the family. It was a difficult conversation that didn't go well at first, but it marked the beginning of a journey toward healing, understanding for all of us. From that day forward, we faced the challenges of being an adoptive family together, with open hearts and commitments to always be honest and loving with each other. Wow, that was an important story, Jessica. Thank you. Deciding to tell your child is a very difficult decision, as you can see from Jessica's experience and the others as well. She wanted to protect Ella from being hurt, but her plan backfired when Ella became upset for not being told about it sooner. I would say that judging when to tell your child is a very personal decision, while telling a child when they're old enough to grasp the concept might be the right for some people, but that's not always the way it is, for everybody. It might not be the right choice for everybody. I think it really comes down to the child and his or her maturity. Granted, other factors may come into play. As you've heard, Jessica did the best she could. I know that I was very young when my parents told me. And then again, my skin is darker than theirs, so that probably expedited the whole process. And this can be true for many adopted children that don't look like their parents. However, some look very similar, thus making the decision to tell a child a little more tricky. When all is said and done, a parent must do what he or she must do to make sure the child feels loved, and so that's very important. Okay, that's episode number 17, aka episode 10 of the second season. I truly thank you for your listenership and look forward to getting more submissions from y'all. If you'd like to send in yours, you can do so by sending it into theadoptiondoor@gmail.com. Once again, I'm your host, Andres, and whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening via podcast. And I wanted to mention really quickly also that for those of you who have sent in your stories, I will get to them. I do have a little bit of a backlog here. So actually, it's quite a bit of a backlog. But I thank you all for your stories. I really appreciate them. And I will get to yours, I promise. Just give me a little time. Thank you very much. And be good to yourself and to others.